Good morning and welcome to the annual FDOT Standard Plans Update Training webinar. My name is Rick Jenkins. I'm the Standard Plans Publication Engineer in the Central Office in Tallahassee. Here's an overview of what we will cover today. First, I will briefly go over the website, our errata process, the current revision log, and a brief update on the 102 series maintenance of traffic standard plans. We will go over various standard plans indexes that were updated with this release cycle. We will have four presenters today. I will go over the miscellaneous roadway indexes. Tim Hawley will cover the drainage structure indexes, the 425 series. Richard Stepp will cover the roadside barrier indexes, fencing index, and lighting indexes. And Cheryl Hudson will cover all the structure-related indexes. First, we're going to look at our website. Here's our main page. This link gives access to all the releases of the standard plans. Here's a link to our archive design standards. As most of you know, the standard plans replaced the design standards a few years ago. The standard plans training link is where our webinars, including this webinar, can be found. Here's some contact information for Durwood Shepard, the State Standard Plans Engineer, and myself. You can also get access to our technical expert list here. This list provides a list of the technical experts for each individual index. I do want to highlight the updates we made to the review and response section of the site. This was our main update to the site this year. We spend a lot of time each year on reviewing and responding to comments during the review process for the standard plans. So we wanted to provide easy access for all users to use these comments and responses for the current year cycle, as well as archive cycles. We've found that a lot of the comments and questions that we receive are repetitive. This will give everyone access and hopefully help you find answers you are looking for. Each year we do 3 different reviews. The internal review goes to FDOT employees only. The industry review goes through our contact mailer process. And FHWA gets the final review and approves the updates to the indexes. All comments for each of these reviews and our responses to those comments can be found here. This is our standard plans page. As you can see, we have added the site to include the new 2021-2022 standard plans at the top of the page. We also have links to the roadway design bulletin that announce the release of the standard plans, plus the effective date of each edition of the standard plans. Here's a current edition of the standard plans with each individual index listed. This is also where we will let you know if we make any revision to the standard plans after release. If we add any information throughout the year, it will be listed in this column. If we find something minor after publication that needs to be updated, like spelling or mislabeled, we'll do it through our errata process. If it's a major revision, it may require an interim standard plan, which would require a bulletin as well. This is also where we would list any developmental standard plans that we have available. Here's our current revision log. We post a revision log each year. The revision log lists all the changes to the indexes, sheet by sheet. This allows users to easily see what we have changed with each index. I did want to briefly mention the 102 series for temporary traffic control. Due to the extensive quantity of information updated in the 102 series, Durwood Shepard is preparing a specific presentation for those updates. Once complete, this presentation will be available in the standard plans training link that I covered earlier. I did want to mention that a big task for us this year was creating the standard plans instructions, SPIs, for all indexes that didn't already have one. The SPIs provide design information that may directly impact how the index is used, payment information, and references to other documents associated with the index. Here's an example of one of the new SPIs for the index 425050. You can see we have references to other manuals and important documents. We provide some requirements for plan content and provide payment information that can be found in the associated spec and basis of estimates. This is our general setup for the SPIs. Now I want to go over some of the indexes that we updated this year. I will not cover all the indexes updated, but I did want to make you aware of a number of important changes. Index 430001, miscellaneous drainage details, is going to be the first index we go over. We did make a few changes to this index, but no real policy changes or new information except for the new sheet with the double guards that I will go over in a second. We revised note 2 and added a 6.5-inch dimension to the side elevation view. We also updated some of the guard details. Here's the updated sheet 5 for the single pipe end guards. This sheet covers 18-inch pipes through 42-inch pipes with single guards. Our next slide shows the new sheet that covers double pipe end guards for pipe sizes 48-inch, 54-inch, and 60-inch. We understand that these are not the only pipe sizes that use these guards. Any pipe larger than 60-inch will require the guard to be detailed in the plans. The next index we're going to cover is index 522002, detectable warnings and sidewalk curb ramps. We made a few updates here to index 522002. Okay, a little background. Standard spec 527 is currently being updated to include product performance acceptance values. In addition, the material requirements were moved to a new Division 3 section 976 surface treatments. These updates were part of the July 2021 standard specifications for road and bridge construction. Therefore, we deleted General Note 5, detectable warnings acceptance criteria, to prevent duplicate information within the spec in standard plans. Here is the new sheet 1 of 7 with the General Note 5 deleted. Here on sheet 2, we made a minor change for clarity. Although they were already shown in the plan views, we were asked to add the landings to the isometric views. Here you can see we showed the landings here in the isometric views to match the plan views. The curb ramp options previously shown in the index were in radial returns. So we added a detail here on sheet 7 of 7 showing the curb ramps outside of the radial returns. Here's a new detail showing the preferred option with the curb ramps outside the radial return. Next index we're going to go over is index 639002, electric power service. The request for this change came from our traffic operations office. So standard plan index 639002 describes the different power service configurations used on FDOT projects. The underground pedestal mounted meter has become a prominent configuration used in traffic signals, ITS, and lighting applications. So we added a new detail, figure F, and updated the notes. Okay, here's the updated index with figure F and the updated notes. The meter equipment enclosure will be approved by the local utility company. All standard electrical service requirements provided by the local utility company will be followed during installation. Next group of indexes I want to go over is index 646.001, 653.001, and 665.001, all pedestrian signal indexes. So we did create one new index this cycle, index 646.001. A little background on why we created this new index. Due to the inconsistent details on previous versions of indexes 653.001 and 665.001, there was confusion regarding the foundation requirements and pavement information for pedestal mounted signal poles and posts. As this information is actually covered in spec 646, we created a new index to consolidate the details of aluminum pedestals and posts used for pedestrian signals and detectors. Existing details are relocated in this new index from indexes 653.001 and 665.001. The new details have been created to address the foundation and placement details for pedestals installed with sidewalk curb. These were added to prevent the push buttons from being located greater than the 10-inch from sidewalk landing. These changes allow for all details covered by specification 646 to be included in a separate 646 standard plans index. Here is the new index 646.001. This is 653.001. The pedestal mounted signal support, including post, transforming base, and foundation, are controlled by spec 646. Therefore, to clarify the requirements of the support details and which specification covers the installation and payment, the information was moved to the new index 646.001. Here's the updated 653.001 with the new note 7, and without the information that was deleted and added in the index 646.001. Similar to index 653.001, 665.001 has brought about confusion regarding the foundation requirements and payment for aluminum pole and pedestal supports for pedestrian signal detectors. So we relocated the information to the new index 646.001 to clarify the intent, as installation and payment information is covered by spec 646. We deleted information specific to the aluminum pole and pedestrian supports. These are also included in the 646 index. A push button orientation has been added as the new detail B to help clarify note 2. We also added further clarification for push button and sign orientation to detail A. The new detail better illustrates the proper orientation of the pedestrian push button and sign. For example, the face of the button and sign is installed parallel to the crossing direction. Did want to note that we also deleted galvanized pole option, as it's not covered by the standard specification for pay items. Next index we're going to cover is 700.010 single column ground signs. I did have one global update throughout the standard plans as an administrative change. ASTM withdrew B308-10, so we had to change it to ASTM B221. I did not show all the indexes with this minor update, but decided to highlight it here as we changed the note 2C reference from ASTM B308 to ASTM B221. We also added a new note 3 for galvanized steel slip base materials. Notice in the existing note 5A, our structure office requested that we add a nut and lock washer option to the single column post galvanized U-bolt, in addition to the option to use double bolts. Also added, this is an option on sheets 6 and 7. Here's the updated sheet 1 with all the updated notes. On sheet 4, we updated note 2 to add the welded stub base. We also clarified when aluminum is required and when galvanized steel is an option in the slip base and foundations detail and in detail A. Here's the updated index with the revised note 2 and the clarification to when aluminum and galvanized steel should be used. Here on sheet 5, we updated the sheet title. We added concrete stub detail for traffic separators, a new detail. We added a couple of updates to the driven post detail, including adding a note stating that grout seal is only required when sidewalks are present. Here's a revised sheet 5. Here's the new concrete stub detail for traffic separators and the updates to the driven post detail. Next index we're going to cover is index 700-102, special sign details. We made quite a few changes to this index 700-102. We added some new signs to the index with these updates, but we also deleted this one sign, FTP-26-06, because it would not meet the requirements for the sign face to be parallel to the crossing direction. Therefore, we removed it from the standard plans. All of the Florida 511 signs had to be updated to show the new Florida 511 logo. Here are the updated 511 signs, Florida 511 signs. We also added a new sign, FTP-68C-21, to replace the R10-25 pedestrian actuation sign. Here are some of the signs we added at the request of the Traffic Engineering and Operations Office. We added FTP-86-21 as a 9x26 version of the standard R1-6 sign to stay consistent with the latest specs change. We also added the truck parking availability signs for the rest areas, way stations, and welcome centers. Here are the bicycle-related temporary traffic control signs that we added to correspond with some of the revisions that were made to the 102 standard plan series. Next index we're going to cover 700-109, traffic controls for street terminations. So we removed the reflective buttons from the type 1 object markers. Reason for this is for type 1 object markers, the MUTCD allows both of the styles, OM1-1 with reflective buttons and OM1-3 without reflective buttons. The performance, reflectivity, and durability of the sheeting has improved over the years, and the markers perform better without the reflective buttons. Corresponding spec change is also being submitted. Here you can see that we removed reflective buttons from the type 1 object marker. Next index we're going to cover is 700-120, enhanced highway signing assemblies. Here on sheet 9, we added a new note 3 regarding the installation of solar powered assemblies. The auxiliary pole configuration shown on sheet 1 of this index will not work with roadside sign assembly 7, shown here on sheet 9, because of the batteries used for the wrong way vehicle detection system weigh more than 170 pounds. A group-mounted controller and battery cabinet provides a safer and maintainable solution with a solar-powered option. We have also actually made one revision to this index with a recent errata. To ensure there's no contradicting information provided, the dimension here was removed and a reference to index 700-101 was added instead. Here's the updated sheet 9 with the new note 3 added and the 700-101 referenced. The next index we're going to cover is 711-001, pavement markings. Some of these updates were made to stay consistent with the updates to the FDOT design manual and the standard specifications. The FDM criteria was updated for the 2021 release to include nose extensions for medians and traffic separators, or hardened center lines to improve pedestrian safety in crosswalks. Tubular markers will now be used as channelizing devices on arterials and collectors in these and other applications. Here on sheet 5 and 6, we added the nose extension and tubular markers for pedestrian refuge island or hardened center lines. We also modified the edge line along the curb terms. Here's sheet 6 with the same updates. Like I mentioned before, a lot of these changes are to stay consistent with other updates that are being made here at FDOT. FDOT will now use the same product as the managed lane markers for permanent channelization devices on arterials and collectors. New specifications 704 and 991 for tubular markers will be effective for July 2021 lettings. The colors will be the same as the lane lines. They supplement either white or yellow for the MUTCD. Until now, high performance delineators and high visibility delineators have been incorrectly referred to as delineators by FDOT. They are in fact tubular markers, which are a type of channelizing device. Delineators and channelizing devices have very different functions per the MUTCD. High performance delineators and high visibility delineators will be removed from the FDOT specifications and the APL. These channelizing devices are being replaced with tubular markers due to the need for improved durability. To stay consistent with these updates, changes were made here on sheet 7. Here you can see the final updates. We clarified application limitations for delineators on grass medians in Note 2. We added tubular marker as an option with reference to new Note 2 in the median detail. We added the new Detail A and changed delineator to tubular markers on traffic separator noses. We made similar updates here on sheet 8. See, we added tubular markers to the details. Over the past couple of years, we've received questions asking the difference between the turn lane information provided in FDOT Design Manual 212-1 and the information you see here on sheet 11 of Index 711-001. The FDM is for design purposes, and therefore design speeds are listed. The standard plan indexes are intended for multiple users on the back end, like construction and maintenance, and therefore use posted speed and the corresponding L values for those speeds. To eliminate this confusion, we deleted this information from the index altogether. This is really information intended for an engineer to use to specify the length in the plans and therefore should be located in FDM. The last index I'm going to go over is Index 711-003, Interchange Markings. Most of these changes to this index were requested by the Traffic Operations Office. We did do some general cleanup to notes and details. The chevrons were previously in an older version of this index, but were removed a few years ago. After coordination, the traffic office decided that these should be added back to the exit ramps. As you can see, we moved all the general notes to sheet 1 to stay consistent with the other indexes. We also created individual sheets for entrance ramps and exit ramps. Here's the new sheet 2 that shows some of the options for entrance ramps. I did want to point out here on sheet 2 that we revised the single lane parallel type entrance detail to include the 2-lane entrance option. The MUTCD does not cover 2-lane parallel entrances, so we thought it best to expand the details within index 711003 to show the more complex scenario. For a single lane ramp, the 6-inch white 3/9 skip would discontinue where the merging taper begins, like the 6-inch white 1030 skip is shown here in the 2-lane option. We received some questions on this since the release of the updated index, so we decided to add a note 3 to clarify that the intent is to continue to install single lane entrances the same way we have been. This was actually done through our errata process a few weeks ago. Here's the new sheet 3 with the chevrons and lane extensions added. This sheet's a good example of the overall changes we made to the index, adding chevrons, lane extensions, and grouping exit ramps and entrance ramps. Here's the finished product. We added chevrons, lane extensions, and grouping the exit ramps and entrance ramps onto individual sheets. Okay, so that's all I have this morning. If you have any questions, please send them in. We will develop a response and get it posted so everyone can see. Our next presenter this morning will be Tim Hawley from our drainage design group.
Thank you all for attending our virtual update training. My name is Tim Hawley with Drainage Office in Central Office. And I'll be going over the 425 series. Okay. A general outline of what I'll be going over is the redevelopment of the indexes, and then a few organizational and design changes. So this is just a quick list of the indexes that were redeveloped, all beginning with the 425. And that is on the website there. And if you go to the website, there's also a revision log for this this issue of the standard plans. Now, if you pull that up for this 425 series, it looks a little bit intimidating. Looks like there's a lot going on, but if you look a little bit closer, and here's just an example from 425-024. Basically, all we're doing is showing the new sheet titles from the redrawn index. And then, as it says here, we redeveloped it, added new sheets so we could expand the drawings, make them a little more clear. Some of the details were a little small and cluttered on the sheets. So by adding new sheets, that allowed us to open it up a little bit more. And of course, by doing that, the information you're used to seeing in one place will still be in the index, but it may be on a different sheet. And as it says in here, we moved the general note 1 to the SPI, and then the general note 6 is included in specifications. So another thing we did, similar to last year's updates with the 430 series for drainage, is notes to the designer were moved to standard plans instructions. Payment notes and such were moved or included in the specifications. All this is to make sure that the standard plan is a construction document. So anything dealing with design needs to be in either a manual or a standard plans instruction, and anything dealing with construction payment would then go to the specifications. Okay, as an example, I am not going to go through every index since the general theme is the same. But here is the old version of 425-001. And you can see here we broke up some of the details, went to sheet 1. The other side was moved to sheet 2. We had notes in here about usage that moved to the SPI, so the designer has those available. But then should make it more clear to the contractor what needs to be installed in the field. And then here is the updated sheet. As you can see, the general notes were moved to the front. We have a table of contents with the contents of each sheet, and then we have details here. Now, on the later indexes past this one, for the most part, sheet 1, you're going to see general notes, a table of contents, and then an isometric detail of the specific application that that index deals with. So as far as organizational and design changes to be covered, I have 3 that I'm going to go over today. The first of which is just a relocation. We received some comments on the old sheet 3 of 5 for 425-010 that some of the details might be better suited for the supplementary details found in 425-001. So that's what happened here, is we moved these 3 details to new sheet 8 of 8 with 425-001. You'll also notice here that the table 3 and a portion of table 4 were deleted. These are found in the drainage design guide and are more design criteria. So then those were omitted in the new index. But then this portion of table 4 here with pipe size and pipe spacing is relevant to construction. So then that was left in. And we end up with this sheet here. So it's a little bit cleaner of a sheet. Everything's drawn to scale, and it should be a little more straightforward for use as a construction document. Okay. The next is we removed references to heavy wheel loads, mainly dealing with grates. We had gotten comments about what exactly is a heavy wheel load and do the grates meet heavy wheel loads? As an example here, the old index 425-040 states that the inlets for use in shoulder gutter on facilities subject to heavy wheel loads. Well, that's more of a design parameter. The contractor doesn't need to determine if there's heavy wheel loads on the job. That should be something decided in design. And then that should be, I believe, 425-041. Sorry about that. But states that what the inlet's suitable for, and then other areas subject to heavy wheel loads. The minimum debris, again, is a design parameter. The pedestrian traffic, That's all design parameters as well as use in a bicycle way. So by removing the reference to heavy wheel loads, now we just have an index. The contractor can build to that as what is shown in the index. Okay, and then those notes I just showed you end up in the standard plans instructions, which are found here. This is just the snippet of the SPI. It's not the complete standard plans instructions. Those are all linked. The list I showed you at the beginning, those are all linked on the right-hand side by index. So as you can see here, we now tell the designer in the instructions what they're intended for. And we added this H20 for the heavy wheel loads to give an idea of what we're looking at when we consider heavy wheel loads, since heavy wheel loads could be interpreted different ways. So the H20 is kind of a general, if it's going to see that type of loading, then the type S or the type V should be acceptable for that. Now with that, we found our reticuline grates for the type S and type V were not quite meeting the H20 loading. And since those two grates could see travel from a heavy wheel load or an H20 type load, the decision was made to go ahead and update that specific grate. So go ahead and show you. This is the old one from 425-40. And you can see we have the bearing bars, which are the deeper bars here, but then in between those, we had a smaller intermediate bar. And when that was analyzed, the loading for that was not quite up to H20. So what we did is going through that, and instead of completely redesigning the grate and coming out with something where producers would have to retool, what we have now, as you can see, this is the updated drawing. And down here, the section II, there are no more intermediate bars. They are all bearing bars. And then it was found that this does meet H20 loading. So then the decision was made to make that for those indexes. And now there's only one grade, whereas we had some before where producers would tell folks there's an option for either basically the pedestrian grade, which is what they tabbed what we had shown in the standard plans, or if you needed an H20, then there was a grade similar to this one. So end result, only one grade for those indexes, and that is what should be installed in the field. Okay, moving on. And while we were redeveloping and reorganizing these indexes, we ran into the notes dealing with concrete, and I believe we had we made a similar update in the 430 series last year. So as you see here, it denotes that the concrete should be class 2, except use class 4 when shown in the plans, and then about structures located in extremely aggressive environments. And it also states that ASTM C478 may be used in lieu of class 2 concrete when it's used for precast. So what we did is now we tell the contractor to use class 2 concrete, except when class 4 concrete is shown in the plans. Now that's a lot less wording. But wait, I've got to use class 2 even if I precast? Is that what's going on here? So let's go ahead and look at spec 346, and then table 346-3 looks like this. Now, that's a lot of words. I don't expect folks to run through that real quick and try and read that. So here's the main part. In this table, the contractor is permitted to use concrete meeting the requirements of ASTM C478 4000 PSI in lieu of the specified Class 1 or Class 2 concrete for precast end walls, inlets, manholes, and junction boxes. So the point here is that the C478 concrete can still be used. We just took out the reference to it, since when you look up Class 2 concrete in the specifications, that's where the reference to ASTM C478 is. Basically, the intent of that change was only to delete the redundancy. It was not to prohibit producers from using the ASTM C478 concrete. Okay? And while we're on it, speaking of precast structures, so there is a process in the materials manual that allows precast producers to produce a shop drawing deviating from the standard plan's index drawings. Those drawings go through an approval process through central office and state materials office, and then they can be used on DOT jobs. Now, in the materials manual, there's a statement that the producers have to resubmit their shop drawings when the index is updated. So before folks go thinking that all the shop drawings we have to be resubmitted, that's likely not the case here. The intent of resubmitting when the index is updated is in case the requirements for that index change or the actual design changes. Since this year's changes are primarily just redrawing and reorganizing, the designs themselves didn't change. The intent is not to require contractors to resubmit these producers to resubmit these shop drawings. So the plan from here is that we have all the precast producers' shop drawings that have been approved. There should be a letter coming out for those producers stating that basically they're going to be grandfathered in. Their approved shop drawings are still valid. The design did not change. And then the producer will need to maintain that with their QC plan, which they're already maintaining their approved shop drawings with that QC plan. So now, as I mentioned earlier, some of the updates that we did when we pulled notes out or deleted notes, that a lot of that was specification information. So the standard spec 425, which matches up with the 425 series of standard plans, was updated. That public comment period ended December 2nd and is intended for use beginning in July 2021 lettings. The main updates to that are fairly simple. We added concrete aprons to the specification, and also there was discrepancies between how those aprons around inlets were termed. Some were called ditch pavement, some were called ditch inlet pavement, some were just called inlet pavement. When really it's a concrete apron, let's use one term, simplify it. So now the specification only has to deal with the concrete apron and what type of concrete to use for those aprons. Several of the indexes mentioned performance turf and how to pay for that. Again, that's a specification item. The payment information for performance turf is now in specification will now be in specification 425. And finally, we had an old pay item in 425-060 for the special concrete end wall that was paid by class of concrete. With the 430 series updates last year, we did away with paying by concrete and changed like the end walls, mitered in sections and such to payment by each. Well, that also negated payment for the special concrete end wall by concrete class. So now there's a new pay item for back of sidewalk end wall, which I believe is 425-17. And if you have any questions on the specification, the package for that is out on the specifications website. Can be viewed there. And that is all I have for you today. If you have any questions, my contact info is right here. Feel free to call or email. And thank you for coming.
Hello, my name is Richard Stepp, Standard Plans Engineer with FDOT Central Office in Tallahassee. And this past cycle, I was primarily responsible for the following index updates: curb and gutter, concrete barrier, guardrail, fencing, mast arm assemblies, and lighting. And today I'm going to talk you through some of those changes and updates. We'll start off with index 520001, curb and gutter, where we've added a new toll header curb. Now this new toll header curb is a fairly simple update. It's for use next to shoulder barriers through toll site facilities, at the request of the Turnpike Enterprise. We use it only with flexible pavement. And so we'll zoom in a little bit more on the detail. And again, this is a pretty simple concrete shape. And the purpose of it is to allow for the electronics of the toll site facility to run through concrete. And it basically supports that conduit. So it is not required when concrete pavement is used. It's only required for flexible pavement to provide that concrete to support the conduit. And the toll header curb has its own unique pay item. Recently added, it's 520-2-10. So if you do run a barrier through a toll site, you need to add that curb in there. Know that there's a pay item available. Our next index update is 521001 for concrete barrier, where we've added some new drainage slots for shoulder barrier. And we'll take a look at that. So you can see in index 521001, this is on sheet 16. The new drainage slot option is located at the bottom of the sheet here. And the idea is that these particular drainage slots are only for use with shoulder barriers and primarily through toll sites, again at the request of the Turnpike Enterprise. And so here we've zoomed in on those drainage slots. And it's important to note that these are not intended to replace traditional drainage structures and drainage inlets. They really are only for toll sites or maybe some other usage where you just simply can't fit traditional drainage structures. But when they are used, because they're expected to be used rarely, they require district drainage and engineer approval per the standard plans instructions. This is outlined in the SPI Part I. This has newly been added in there. Requires district drainage engineer approval. And moving on to index 536001 and 002 for guardrail, we have miscellaneous updates on a couple standard plan sheets. And in the standard plans instructions, we've added a new guardrail design checklist, which I think will be helpful for both new and experienced designers. Now looking at sheet 6 for general guardrail cross sections, we've removed additional 1 to 10 max cross slope callouts. And we had removed some of these callouts already from shoulders, and now we're moving ahead and removing them from the miscellaneous asphalt pavement as well. It had come to our attention again in recent months that contractors and sometimes even designers were looking to the guardrail standard for shoulder cross slopes as opposed to the FDM. And that's generally not the way it's supposed to work. The issue is 1 to 10 max is placed in here for optimum guardrail performance. Sometimes people don't look any further for information. And so in order to avoid that, we went ahead and removed these 1 to 10 max labels, which again are only placed for the purpose of the guardrail performance in the guardrail standard. The intention is not to provide governing cross slope information for shoulders in the guardrail standard. Instead, that would be found in FDOT design manual roadway geometrics, typically FDM 210 and FDM 211 and the like. So again, the idea is please don't look to the guardrail standard to design your shoulder cross slopes. Instead, look to the appropriate places in the FDM, and then you place those slopes in the plans, and the plans are what govern shoulder slopes, not the guardrail standard. Okay, so now looking at sheet 17, we've added a new bolt treatment for sidewalks. This is at the point where the guardrail would connect to a concrete barrier or traffic railing at a bridge. And the idea is we want to provide some more flexibility for pedestrian pathway placement when the pedestrian pathway would happen to come near the end of those bolts. So when a sidewalk or shared use path are within 4 feet of the backup barrier, you could apply this bolt treatment that we've added, and that could provide some additional safety. And so zooming in on the detail, the idea is that the bolts here would be trimmed down to about the level of the nut. That would help prevent snagging of bicyclists and pedestrians. And the basic concept is explained in the note below the detail down here. And so you can know that when developing your plan view and placing sidewalk or shared use path, you now have the option to place it closer to this connection as shown. Okay, now we're moving on to changes to the standard plans instructions for guardrail, still index 536001. And here we've added some new gating approach terminal definitions. We had always had the gating approach terminal option, but saw a need to explain the difference between the two. And so now that's located part C2E. And with this new addition, we saw the opportunity to explain the concepts of gating and non-gating for those that may not be familiar. And so we placed a couple drawings down here to explain the basic concept. And simply, gating would be a breakaway approach terminal. And the idea is that they're designed so that between posts 1 and 3, if a vehicle were to hit that, it would typically break away, absorb the impact in a safe way, but that would typically allow the vehicle just to pass right through it. And so that wouldn't be included in your length of need for shielding a hazard back here. And so you could see with this blue departure line, you want to design it so that the guardrail extends past that blue departure line up until post 3. And then your length of need extends from the hazard to post 3. With a non-gating terminal, that's essentially not a breakaway design, and you should have redirective capability starting at post 1. And so this might save you some space if you happen to have, maybe a driveway or a side street and you're trying to shield maybe a continuous hazard back here, such as a canal, and you want to get the most possible length of need extending all the way to that side street or that driveway. You may want to select to use a non-gating terminal. Non-gating terminals are helpful for those type of project constraints. Now, when calculating length of need, the length of need design tool does explain how to handle gating and non-gating in the comment section to the right. And basically, if you're using non-gating, you would input length of gating as 0, and it does explain for you how to do that. Just as a reminder, the length of need design tool is located on the standard plans website right next to index 536001, and that's basically an Excel sheet. Now, one last thing to mention regarding gating and non-gating terminals is the availability on the APL website. Because the department has now moved to MASH approach terminals for TL3 and higher speeds, manufacturers have been having more difficult time making the MASH approach terminals work with a non-gating design. And so currently right now, I don't believe we have any of those available for TL3. And so we only have non-gating terminals available for TL2 for the lower speed. But we are actively on the lookout for possible non-gating terminals for MASH TL3. So if you do want to incorporate non-gating in your design for TL3 and higher speeds, please check the APL website before doing so. Okay, and now moving on to the last page of the SPI for Guardrail is probably the thing that I'm most excited about because I think it has the potential to save time and improve the design process for engineers, both new and experienced. And that's this new Guardrail design features checklist. And so as we know, roadside barrier design is surprisingly lengthy and nuanced. And in order for engineers to be sure that they're confident with their designs and that they're doing things correctly, design information, it starts to get pretty lengthy. There are many cases and many nuances to cover. And if we don't cover it, we tend to get questions. And so it can be daunting for new engineers who are just getting into it for the first time. And so the idea is that in a single sheet at the end of the SPI, we've summarized all the major components of Guardrail, all the major design features, and it's just basically a checklist. And so if you are to go through the checklist and address all of the items, chances are you've thought about maybe 90% of what you need to think about for Guardrail design. And so really, I think what would help designers is kind of a streamlined starting point. Again, everything fits on one page to guide you through the design basics. It's just a helpful starting point for new and experienced designers to make sure that you've considered all of the general components of Guardrail and you haven't left anything out. Now, it's important to note this is not all inclusive. Again, it all fits on a single sheet, but all of the information for Guardrail design is still in the FDM, still in the standards, still in the standard plans instructions and the specs. It does require looking through it all to have a general idea of what's in there, but this list will guide you through and it should provide you with the things that you need to think about for Guardrail design, including key references to all of the other policy locations. This list should capture a majority of the design process. And so just touching on a few of the topics covered here, you could see reading down the left side of the checklist, we start off with just basics of shielding hazards and considering shielding. We give some key references, the things you need to understand, or clear zone, minimum lateral offsets, what above ground hazards are, and just basically deciding whether or not to shield a hazard and whether or not to use barrier. You need to look to FDM 215. And then we start going through the typical design process where you need to understand length of need, where to look for that, what to do on the trailing end of the barrier, how far to extend it past the hazard, guardrail lateral offsets from the roadway, and where to look in the FDM for that, hazard setback behind the barrier, taper rates of the barrier, the grading around the barrier, what trailing anchorage to use, what type of approach terminal to use. Now continuing on, this is all on a single sheet on the SPI, so you can just print it out on one sheet. This is the end of that sheet. You'd be looking at the approach transition connection to rigid barriers for bridge traffic railing and concrete barriers, minimum guardrail lengths, the typical guardrail accessories you'd use, how to use special posts, and then basically some of the planned content requirements. And now, one other thing I did want to mention is that this information, really a lot of it was prompted from the quality assurance reviews that we performed for guardrail designs in the districts. And the idea is that designers reading through the descriptions provided would have solved a lot of the issues that we saw in the QARs. And so if this checklist is used and all the descriptions are read on one page, it really will resolve a lot of the issues that we've seen, and we should have better guardrail designs across the board as a result. And so those starting a new guardrail design, please look to the last page of the SPI. I think that's a helpful starting point. Okay, we've reached the end of our roadside barriers section. And speaking of information to help out roadway designers with their roadside barrier design, we have a new training announcement. And so we've created and we're working on a new CBT that's titled Introduction to Roadside Barriers Design Overview. It's coming soon to Learning Curve. It's a little over a half-hour training, but it is packed with a lot of good information, a lot of explanation of FDOT Design Manual or FDM 215, getting into when to use roadway barriers and which barriers to use. And I think it's particularly good for new engineers. It really actually will help steepen the learning curve to get new designers up to speed a lot more quickly. And honestly, even experienced engineers, I think you'll find some good nuggets in there. It's a fairly quick training, so I think it will be worthwhile for all. So please look for that. The anticipated release is likely in January. Okay, so moving on to Index 550 series for fencing. We've added all new standard plans instructions, and so we'll just briefly walk through what's included in that. As you can see, we've displayed the whole standard plans instructions at the left. And so the idea is that for standard plans index 550.001, 002, 003, and 004, we've provided some general design information as a good starting place for designers. And so we've described the fence placement, when you would use a fence, FDM design information references, as you can see here for fence placement. We've explained some of the plans content and what we would expect to see in plan views and section views. We provided the call out points that correspond to some key locations that contractors need to know. And then we've included the pay items. And so in general, the SPI provides a good starting point for information when electing to use particular standard plan index. And so be aware, there's now some additional guidance for using the fencing standards. Moving on to Index 649-031 for mast arm assemblies. The SPI now has a new mast arm luminaire attachment policy. And so what we're discussing here is in the standard plans drawings. Here you see that we have a mast arm structure, and then in the standard plans, there's also the option to mount this luminaire arm on top of it, extend the upright even higher beyond the typical arm. And this option has been available for engineers for several years, but now we've seen the need to develop a policy for its usage. And so we did speak with our district lighting experts to better understand when they would want to use a light like this and some of the pros and cons for usage. And so the idea that was agreed upon was that this should basically be a secondary option. And so the idea is to use only where project constraints do not allow for placement of independent light poles. And then this basically avoids possible conflicts with electrical wiring and maintaining agencies. And so if you do use this option, just know that you are adding some possible complication with different contractors and municipalities for installation and then also for maintenance. And so the idea is that this really should be a last resort only if you can't fit an independent light pole. And then the next part of this usage policy stated in the SPI is that if you do choose to use this, a little bit of guidance is given. And it's basically saying that you need to produce a document that shows you've contacted the applicable construction and maintaining agencies, you verified the responsible parties, and then you include that written summary in the project documents to ensure that responsibilities are clear and that everything's been handled correctly. And last but not least, we're going to take a look at Index 715.001 and 002 for lighting. We've got some miscellaneous index updates. And then in the SPI, we have a new pole placement policy for medians. Now looking at conventional lighting, Index 715.001, Sheet 1, we have a new call out for foundation alignment, and note that this is the vertical alignment. And so in this location, we're showing the finished grade elevation in relation to the top edge of the foundation. And so the top edge of the concrete foundation requires alignment with the finished grade on the side nearest to the street. And so that's shown right here. That description is provided in Note 3 at the bottom. You can see the reference to Note 3. And zooming in on the detail, you can see the point we're talking about down here circled in green. And so the elevation tolerance in Note 3 is called out as -0 inches and +2 inches. And so I am aware that sometimes designers have a hard time wrapping their head around a tolerance that includes a zero, such as -0 inches +2 inches, but I can explain. So the basic idea is that the foundation elevation can't go below the finished grade. You don't want an indentation in the ground, that could fill with water or that somebody can snag their foot or their bicycle wheel in. It just simply should not go underground. The ideal target would be exactly flush. And so the idea is that, you can aim for 0 inches to try to be as flush as possible. Going underground is simply not acceptable, but it is permitted that this can go 2 inches above ground, as that doesn't present much of a hazard if it just raises up a couple of inches. And so in general, the contractor would likely aim for flush or just slightly above flush, and that's the idea. And so again, elevation tolerance, -0 inches +2 inches, prevents that from going underground. It also prevents it from sticking up much too high above ground and then becoming a hazard itself. Also, looking back to the same sheet. We've revised notes 1 and 2 a little bit, just provide some more clear linkage to 715.002 for cases where the light pole is mounted on top of a concrete barrier or traffic railing. We're explaining how this wiring scheme shown here translates into the wiring and into the conduits of 715.002. So just know we've added some extra notes here to connect to 715.002 for some added clarity. And now speaking of index 715.002 for standard aluminum lighting, we'll take a look at sheet 2. We've clarified the call out for mounting heights when it comes to wildlife sensitive lighting. Previously, there was a listing of mounting height increments between 20 and 50 feet without explaining the purpose. We've now gone ahead and added the purpose of those lower increments of 20 and 25 feet. And so those lower mounting heights of 20 and 25 feet are only permitted for wildlife sensitive. Other conventional lighting can't use those heights, and so we've spelled it out here, wildlife sensitive only. That said, the wildlife sensitive can be used for the higher mounting heights as well. There's no restriction on that. That's just considered conventional. If you did want to go higher for wildlife sensitive, no restriction on that. That is all explained as well in the standard plans instructions. And so in summary, 20 foot and 25 feet mounting height is for wildlife sensitive only. And so we've clarified that right here. And now our last topic for standard lighting is found in the standard plans instruction sheet 2, and that's a new minimum falling area requirement when light poles with frangible bases are placed on medians. And so in this case, when we say median, we're referring to anywhere where there are traffic lanes basically on both sides of it. Those traffic lanes can be an on-ramp or an off-ramp or a roadway frontage road. And so that's depicted down here. You can see the traffic lanes, top and bottom. And note that in this particular drawing, the light is already laying on its side. This is after impact, but this just gives you an idea of what we mean by median placement. Now at left, we've depicted the standard roadway light pole. And typically when we say standard roadway light pole, we're speaking of the light pole that has a frangible base and it's not mounted to a concrete barrier, traffic railing, or pedestal. Now, in general, the standard light poles are shown with one arm only. The intention is to put it on the roadside and then not have a traffic lane located behind it. In general, when a double arm light pole is used, it's placed on top of a median barrier and it doesn't have a frangible base because it's shielded by the concrete barrier itself. And it doesn't have a frangible base because if it's on a median, the idea is that it won't fall into the adjacent traffic lane. That said, there may be cases where a designer chooses to use a double arm light pole mounted on a frangible case. That would be project specific use. That's not standard. But regardless of whether one or two arms are used, if it's placed atop a frangible base, then the minimum falling area does apply. And the reason for the minimum falling area is to provide added safety for traffic lanes that may be placed behind the light pole that could be seen here in the elevation view or here in the plan view, so that if an errant vehicle does impact that light pole and it breaks away as it's supposed to do, it has some clear area to fall and not affect those adjacent traffic lanes. We don't want the pole falling into adjacent traffic lanes and creating another hazard. And so that's the reason for the minimum falling area. And so this minimum falling area that's required is basically equal to 40% of the overall mounting height. And as you might know, the mounting height is the dimension between ground level and the luminaire. And so, for example, if you have a mounting height of 50 feet from ground to the luminaire, or in the plan view for this fallen light pole, it's basically kind of measured at a diagonal. But if your mounting height is 50 feet, then you require a 20-foot offset because 20 feet is 40% of 50 feet. And that's really all there is to it. So whatever your mounting height happens to be, you need to provide some space behind it that's 40% of that mounting height. So please take note of that new policy in SPI Sheet 2. And this concludes my portion of the Standard Plans Design Update training. If you have any questions, my contact information is located here. It's also found on our Roadway Design Office website. Thank you for your time and attention, and now we will have our next speaker.
Hello and welcome to the structure section of the Design Update training for fiscal year 21-22. We are basically going to cover some deleted standards, some new and promoted standards, of course, the revisions and SPI revisions and the cells. Now, this is not a comprehensive list of everything we're going to be covering, but or all the changes. But if you check the revision date on any index, the bottom left corner, it will let you know if it was revised or when it was, what year it was last revised. And you can always check the revision log for more details. The only deleted standard we have is the 20-inch square pre-stressed concrete pile. This was rarely used, and because of that, it was more expensive. And of course, has less capacity than the 24-inch pile. So we have made this one go away. We did add 2 new standards for you. We have the temporary acro bridge for the 700 series. Now, the maintenance yard has about as much of this as it does the old 300 series, and this is a lot more versatile. So you will have to do some work with acro on designing for this one. It's not totally pre-designed like the 300 series. Now, the other new one we added was the concrete barrier junction slab wall copings with FRP. Now, this was added for Turnpike mostly because they need the non-conductive materials under the tolling facilities. But it's very, very similar to the 521-610 concrete barrier junction slab. So, and it can also be used where you need something that's corrosion resistant. Now, we have also moved or promoted, I guess you could say, some developmental standards, and I think you're going to like these. FSBs have been so popular and they have performed very well out in the field. So we added this nice optional exterior beam section, and we brought them up and made them a full standard. We're calling it the 450 series. And I think you're going to think these will be well used. The FRP bar bending details we also moved up because we're using it more and more in standards and other designs for the corrosion resistance. We also made changes to the 100-200 series, the temporary acro bridge, the 300 series. This was necessary because we added the 700 series and we needed to change the title just to differentiate between the two. And for the cantilever retaining walls, we added FRP to the design program, and then the rest was simple as just removing steel from the bar bending diagram. So you can use steel or FRP bars. Now, last year we did some changes with the silica fume metakaolin ultra fly ash to highly reactive pozzolans. This year we went through and found some more. So I think we have them all. And the other change we made on the 455-001 was deleting the 20-inch piles from the table because we deleted the standards. On the pre-stressed piles, EDC instrumentation, we deleted the notes that we added during the interim and added information to the drawing and the data table in SPI instead. So if you're still confused, just contact your geotech and they can help you through this one. We also made a change to the stainless steel strand note to reflect the new ASTM criteria for the stainless steel piles. For the corrosion resistant piles, we added the 0.6-inch diameter high strength stainless steel strands and changed the CFRP strand pattern for the 1/2-inch diameter for the 24-inch piles. Now, the change with the highly reactive pozzolans is only for stainless steel. You don't need that for the FRP reinforced piles. Now, this change I think you're going to like. It will save some money on sidewalk projects with pedestrian rails or guide rails. We did a lot of testing and at the structures lab, and we proved that the reduced embedment on the adhesive anchors works. Doesn't work by doing calculations, but it works in the field. So we reduced the depth of the sidewalk edge beam from 12 inches to 9 inches to go along with reducing the anchor from 9 inches to 6 inches. Now you may need to highlight this for contractors, but this I think they're going to like. It will save a lot of concrete. Now this is a change that doesn't really change anything. In an effort to be more consistent and to make it easier to communicate questions on the notes, we simply numbered the notes and put them all in similar order across the traffic railings. So instead of having it done by pedestrian, bike, or rail V grooves, we have it 1, 2, 3, 4. Just makes it a little easier to communicate and a little more consistent. Additional changes were made to some of the traffic railing standards for the 36-inch single slope. Some notes were added to sheet 2 and detail B to clarify when to use the height transition. And on the 42-inch single slopes, the transition to the 42-inch roadway concrete barriers was removed. The shapes are so drastically different and they rarely have to be connected. So we just left the transition to the 44-inch concrete barriers on index 521-610. That is when you're mostly going to make that 2-inch transition. Speaking of concrete barrier junction slab standards, notes 12 through 14 were added to help clarify these transition details. Note 13 was my best attempt at trying to explain the options between either raising it 2 inches on the bottom or just slowly increasing the height by 2 inches. We also made some changes to the SPIs to go along with the changes to the standards. For those not familiar with the SPIs, they're on the website on the right-hand side and hold a wealth of great information for the designer. We added a new SPI to go with the new detour bridge, with it being so different from the 700 series being so different from the 300 series. And as I mentioned earlier, we made a change to the pile data table. So we updated all of those cells the copy of the cells that are located in the SPI. And we also changed the corrosion resistant piles. We updated the pile interaction diagrams to include the 0.6-inch diameter high strength stainless steel and the change to the 24-inch pile CFRP layout. Because the 521-611 is so similar to the 610, it's just a difference between steel, carbon steel and FRP. I just merged the instructions together. They worked all right. So if you want information for the FRP, it's in with the carbon steel. And of course, the 450, the FSBs, the Florida slab beams. We added the SPI for those. It has changed since the developmentals, but it's essentially the same. And once again, we've made changes to your cells, so please update your cell library. As noted previously, we added a note for the embedded gauges to the pile data table, so that one's been updated. We also made a very small but significant change to the reference to the AASHTO in the load rating tables. When they went to the 8th edition, they just changed the numbering, so we updated our numbering as well. And of course, the FSBs, 2 cells. So we've moved those from the developmental to the standards as well. Now, looking ahead for what's coming, we don't have any real standards that we're looking at this point in time, but we are making some big changes to the programs. They're not out yet, but the pre-stressed beam program and box culvert programs are getting a major rework. And we're also working on a program for the dual truss posts for the overhead sign structures. It's hard to say. And of course, we are always looking for new great ideas, so send them to us. And right now, I don't think any of the developmentals are on the promotion list, but that's subject to change. And we are always here to assist you in any way we can. And if you ever have ideas for improvements or find a misspelled word, please go ahead and let us know as you find them. Now, for any issues that come up during design, please give us a call. The ones that come up during construction, you're better off going through construction to get to us. That's just the way it works. Just keep in mind, these changes cannot be done quickly. There's a series of checks and, we send them out for internal review and external review and FHWA review, and it's all sequential. So it takes time to get through all of these. So send us your idea whenever you get it. Just pop us an email and don't wait till the last minute because it probably will not make it. Now, who do you contact? Most of you know Andre. He's been here for a long time. G has been with us for over 5 years now, and she knows the programs and the standards very well. Joshua and Reza have been here for over a year now, and they have been working hard on the programs and on the standards. So all of them should be able to help you there anytime. There is one caveat. Don't call me. I am retiring to spend some more time with family. And so it's been a pleasure working with all of you over the years. And I will miss everybody, but time for me time. So have a great life and bye for now. Stay healthy and contact any of the team with any questions.